Hello and good morning, everybody. It's me, Julian, and welcome to the Monday morning Introduction to Philosophy and Theory lecture. Today I'm going to be talking about the four masters, which are the Obscene Master, the Pseudo Master, the Perverse Master, and the Authentic Master. And before I begin, I'd like to say that you can find a more detailed analysis of these concepts in my ebook titled The Four Masters, which came out last week exclusively on Patreon. And if you purchase that ebook, you also gain access to the complete ebook archives. And these are basically ebooks designed to give you accessible introductions to Žižekian philosophy, Lacanian psychoanalysis, and Kantian and Hegelian idealism. But before I begin, I'd like to say that about 10 years ago, so 2016 I think, I attended a seminar that was hosted by Slavoj Žižek at Birkbeck in London. And the title of that session was The Rise of the Obscene Master, which at the time was a tacit reference to Donald Trump, who had recently emerged victorious in the in the US presidential election at the time. And Žižek's basic argument was that the US was undergoing a crisis of authority, as he put it, in which people had lost trust and faith in the existing institutions and the status quo, and that Trump therefore represented a strongman populist figure who opportunistically was able to take advantage from this cynicism and turn it into a political platform as such. And the Obscene Master for Žižek was a psychoanalytic category by which to understand the rise of figures such as Trump. Figures who embrace vulgarity and rhetorical obscenities, and who nevertheless, in so doing, grant their supporters a kind of license to enjoy, a kind of obscene jouissance. And here one has to be very precise. The term obscene is one that comes from within Lacanian psychoanalysis. Within Lacanian psychoanalysis, something is always obscene when it is some kind of a substitute, which is to say, you don't enjoy the thing directly, you enjoy it indirectly, which is to say, the obscene enjoyment that Trump's followers derive from him does not stem from any proper, positive, if you will, political vision as such, but instead stems from the properly obscene enjoyment of getting back at the system, at inducing woke or politically correct tears, and of course, at the expense of both internal and external foes, real and imaginary, the idea of a supposed invasion of illegal migrants, as well as an internal conspiracies of the deep state, etc. Therefore, what makes Trump an obscene master isn't just that he embodies, if you will, a sort of powerful reactionary stance against the status quo and against neoliberal, democratic, politically correct politics, but also that he grants his audience a license to enjoy, a reactionary jouissance. They relish the chaos that he brings in his wake. Some simply want to see the world burn, as it were. But it is also, in that sense, a pseudo-crisis, a pseudo-revolution, in that everything has to change in order for everything to remain the same. Indeed, the first Donald Trump presidency, like many other presidencies, fundamentally served to protect the status quo and the corporate interests that underwrite American political modernity. But what I'd like to do in this video is talk a little bit less about the Obscene Master and instead flesh out this concept. Because I think that the Perverse Master and the Pseudo Master and the Authentic Masters are equally, if not more interesting categories. In fact, they're all interlinked. They shouldn't be seen as formal archetypes by which we identify different types of people, but instead as different manifestations, if you will, of what you might call the problem of authority and how we relate to it. So Žižek's basic argument, and I want to be very clear here, is that the Obscene Master emerges as a reaction to what used to be the predominant form of ideological mastery, namely perverse mastery. So who or what is the Perverse Master? Well, I'll give you a very simple definition. The Perverse Master is someone who does not own their authority, who disavows it, like the boss who pretends to be your best friend, or the parent who says that it is the child's decision what they do, etc. And of course, the political manifestation of this in the 1990s and early 2000s and 2010s is the idea of a post-political, consensus-based, hegemonic politics, which is to say a politics that is supposedly non-ideological, that simply outsources its problems to consulting firms like McKinsey or algorithms that can help us decide what is the best course of action. Which is to say, after 1989, in the 1990s, after the end of the Cold War, as it were, we have the assumption that we now live in a post-political or post-ideological age, in which ideology is this messy political thing that we have to do without. And against this, we have the emergence of like middle management politics, the idea that democracy isn't about representing different political principles, but instead that they're essentially that society is a business problem to be solved. Therefore, politicians become figures who essentially resemble middle management. In this sense, they become perverse masters, masters who don't fully embody their own authority. And you could even see this within like virtue signaling and politically correct apologizing for your own privilege. Here we have a certain disavowal of one's own privilege. Of course, in this performative process, one asserts one's privilege nonetheless. In the same sense that the boss who pretends to be your best friend nevertheless tacitly wants you to obey his orders, etc. And so there's something perverse in this disavowed stance to the extent that you're expected to pretend like you're not actually hierarchically lower than them, like you have to pretend that you're equals, but nevertheless you know full well that they could fire you at any moment. This is also what Marx identifies as what will later in psychoanalysis be called the perverse problem of ideology, that capitalism presents itself as a liberation from the feudal system, but in a sense simply disavows the oppression and reifies it ideologically into a supposed competition amongst equals in which everyone is equal to the extent that they are willing to sell their own labor. That's the perverse master. And against the backdrop of the perverse master, which is therefore the ideological supplement to contemporary globalized capital, we have the emergence of the seemingly heroic obscene master who relishes the embrace of a kind of vulgar, obscene authority, who says what he thinks and speaks his mind, etc., who therefore becomes an attractive populist figure against the backdrop of the perverse master, who always seems to be thinking about what the right thing is to say, who always speaks in coded language, who never speaks from the gut or the heart, as it were. The neoliberal, politically correct master is therefore the perverse master. Now, the Pseudo Master can be given very simply. The Pseudo Master is a guru figure who fully identifies with the usually somewhat conservative, reactionary stance of being the patriarchal figure of authority, who teaches you how to live, who gives you rules for life. He is the embodiment of wisdom. Perhaps the most popular one today is Jordan Peterson. And the pseudo-master here is pseudo to the extent that he fully identifies with this figure of the master. He plays the role altogether too well, therefore facilitating your own emancipation if you follow his rules and tacitly accept the ideology underlying them. Žižek also notes that Lacan is a pseudo-master. This is the scandal of Lacan, that he introduces the notion of pseudo-mastery into the psychoanalytic treatment as a necessary burden to be overcome, i.e. the process by which the subject realizes that they don't actually need a master, they were free to begin with. They have to believe in the master so as to fall out of love with him. And finally, the authentic master. The authentic master does not exist. That's the conclusion. The authentic master is therefore precisely an illusionary category. We have to free ourselves from the idea of the master so that we can be free, emancipated subjects. In other words, we have to go through the problem, the crisis of authority, to realize that we cannot rely on the pseudo, obscene, or perverse masters. That is the problem of the master. The authentic master disappears as soon as we realize that we never needed him in the first place. You can find a more detailed analysis of this in my ebook, The Four Masters, available on Patreon. Thank you so much. I will see you.